My name is Rebecca Stanton. I'm 34, and I've spent more than a decade working as a structural engineer in Denver. In my world, putting your name on a drawing means taking responsibility for what happens after people start building. That was why seeing my name on a project I had never accepted felt like someone had reached into my career and signed for me. I was at a municipal design review that afternoon for one of my own clients. The meeting was running late, so I stayed while the next development team set up their presentation. Then I saw my husband, Caleb, sitting near the front beside Brielle Dawson, an interior designer I had met briefly months earlier. Caleb had told me he was meeting a client across town. At first, I thought maybe his company was involved. Then the slide changed to the consultant team, and my name appeared under Structural Engineering Advisor. I took out my phone and photographed the screen before anyone noticed me. A few minutes later, Elliot Price from the investment group said having me attached gave them confidence in the technical side. Caleb finally looked toward the back of the room and saw me. His face changed for half a second, but he finished the presentation as if nothing was wrong. When the meeting ended, I waited until the room had mostly cleared and asked when he had decided I was working on his project. He pulled me aside and said it was only a preliminary deck, nothing official, and he had planned to talk to me once financing looked real. I asked why Brielle was standing beside him like a partner when he had always described her as someone he barely knew. Caleb said I was mixing marriage problems with a business opportunity that could change both our lives. I told him the only thing I knew for certain was that I had never given him permission to use my name. Then I looked back at the empty screen and realized I still had no idea how many people already believed I had, or what Caleb had promised them about me. I did not go home with Caleb. I drove straight back to my office and asked Martin Keller, our director of risk and compliance, if he had 10 minutes. I showed him the photo from the meeting and told him exactly what Caleb had said. Martin did not tell me everything would be fine. He asked whether I had signed an engagement letter, approved a proposal, or authorized anyone to present me as part of that project. I checked our system while he sat beside me. There was no project number, no fee proposal, no timesheet, and no consulting agreement tied to that development. Nothing showed that I or my company had ever accepted the work. That should have made me feel better, but it did the opposite. My name was already circulating without any record explaining why it was there. Caleb came home late that evening and acted like I had embarrassed him. He said developers put tentative consultants in early presentations all the time, and because I was his wife, he assumed I would at least review the engineering package when the financing became real. I asked him whether Brielle was really just a business contact. Instead of answering, he said our marriage had been tense for months because I cared more about deadlines than anything happening between us. That answer bothered me more than a simple lie would have. He was not only defending the project, he was starting to rewrite our marriage while I was standing in front of him. I told him to send me every version of the presentation that used my name. Caleb said he could not, because the documents belonged to the development group. The next morning, Martin called me into his office. A consultant working on the project had already emailed our company asking to coordinate with my structural concept, assuming I had been involved from the beginning. Attached was a PDF I had never seen before. I opened it and stopped on the technical narrative. The wording, layout, and even the way the assumptions were organized looked almost disturbingly familiar, because someone had deliberately written it to sound like me. I spent the next morning comparing the PDF with projects I had worked on. Some language was almost identical to wording from presentations, including how I described load assumptions and structural risks. Months earlier, Caleb had asked me for sample decks because he wanted to understand how developers and engineers communicated. I had sent them without much thought. I believed he was finally taking an interest in my work. The more I compared the files, the clearer the pattern became. No one had copied a complete design, but pieces of my portfolio had been placed into the project carefully enough to make my involvement look real. Then I found one line in the investor deck that changed everything. It said formal engineering engagement was expected after financing commitment. That was when I understood Caleb did not need my signature yet. He needed investors to believe I would eventually sign because my name made the project look safer while they decided whether to fund it. Once financing moved forward, I would be under pressure to cooperate or become the person blamed for weakening the deal. A few weeks earlier, Caleb had told me he hoped I would not kill his opportunity over paperwork. I had been irritated, but I let it go. Now it sounded less like frustration and more like preparation. Martin asked me to prepare a statement identifying which materials were mine, which came from work samples, and which documents I had never reviewed or approved. I also called Vanessa Crawford because I no longer trusted this problem to stay inside my office. Vanessa told me to separate two questions: whether Caleb was lying about Brielle, and whether he had used my identity to create financial leverage. I told her I could not prove the first one yet. The second was sitting in front of me with version numbers attached. Later that afternoon, I found an old calendar invitation Caleb had deleted from our calendar. The title read, Funding Structure, Engineering Commitment, B, D, and Caleb, Elliot, and Brielle were listed as attendees. I stared at those names before closing the calendar. Brielle was not waiting outside my marriage for Caleb to leave it. She was already sitting inside the future he was building with my name. I did not go through Caleb's phone or hire anyone to follow him. I started with the project calendar, travel records, and the invoices already connected to the development group. Several trips Caleb had described as routine site visits included Brielle on the same itinerary. One hotel invoice listed both of them during a week when Caleb told me he had been delayed overnight because of bad weather. When I asked him directly, he finally stopped pretending Brielle was only a business contact. He admitted the relationship had become personal, but he immediately tried to control the timeline. According to Caleb, it had only happened after our marriage was already broken in every way that mattered. I told him a marriage does not end privately because one person needs a cleaner explanation for what he did. Caleb said I had no idea what it was like to be married to someone whose career always seemed bigger than his. He said Brielle listened to his ideas and made him feel like he was capable of building something important on his own. I asked him why. If he wanted something that was truly his, he had needed my name to make investors believe in it. He looked away instead of answering. That evening, Patricia called me and said Caleb had spent years trying to prove he could create something without living in my shadow. She told me I was being too rigid about a project that could have changed both our lives. I asked if she knew Caleb had been using my name before I agreed to anything. Patricia was quiet for several seconds, then said she thought I would eventually help him because I always had before. That answer told me more than anything Caleb had admitted. His family had already decided how this would work. Caleb would move forward first. I would object. And then I would step in because I would not want to be responsible for his failure. I told Patricia that supporting my husband did not mean letting him make promises in my name. The next morning, Elliot Price emailed me directly. He wanted a formal meeting to confirm exactly what role I had agreed to take before his investment group continued due diligence. Caleb had spent months making my involvement sound settled. Now the people funding his future wanted to hear the answer from me. The meeting took place at Elliot Price's office 2 days later. Martin came with me, and Caleb and Brielle were already seated across the table. Elliot did not ask about my marriage or what had happened between Caleb and me. He asked one question first. Had I, or had my company, ever accepted this project, approved its structural concept, or authorized my name in the funding materials? I answered no to each one. Martin confirmed that our company had no engagement letter, project number, fee proposal, or approval record tied to the development. I kept my explanation short because I did not need to tell Elliot what kind of husband Caleb had been. I only needed to explain what I had and had not agreed to. For the first time, Caleb had to sit quietly while someone else heard the facts without his version around them. Caleb finally said I had seen site photos and talked with him about the concept at home. I told Elliot that was true. I had listened to my husband discuss an idea over dinner and occasionally answered general questions because that was normal in our marriage. But hearing about a project was not the same as accepting professional responsibility for it. I had never reviewed the final package, priced the work, attended coordination meetings, or agreed to join the engineering team. Elliot turned to Caleb and asked why the deck said formal engineering engagement was expected after financing if no commitment existed. Caleb said he believed I would join once financing was secure and called it a reasonable assumption based on our marriage and my past support. I looked at him and said, "You call it an assumption because that sounds better than permission you never had." Brielle lowered her eyes, and Caleb stopped talking. Elliot said the investment group would pause due diligence until the development team corrected its consultant list and proved the project still worked with another engineering firm. I did not ask him to cancel the deal, punish Caleb, or remove Brielle. I only asked that my name and work be removed from every document where they did not belong. Outside, Caleb accused me of destroying something that could have changed our future. I told him I had only stopped helping him sell a future I never agreed to build. Brielle contacted me 3 days after the investment group paused due diligence. She asked to meet for coffee because she wanted to know whether I had never agreed to join the project. She did not begin with an apology. She asked if Caleb had ever had permission to promise my involvement. I told her no. She said Caleb had described the engineering agreement as a matter of timing. According to him, I was waiting for financing before stepping in. I told her I had never received a contract, submitted a fee proposal, attended a coordination meeting, or agreed to take responsibility. Brielle looked down at her coffee. For the first time, she seemed more concerned about what Caleb had told her than about me. I asked what Caleb had promised her. She said that after financing closed, he planned to leave his job and lead development while she handled creative direction and the hospitality brand. He had described me as a technical partner who would stay involved long enough to make the project stable. After that, he said he would separate from me and use his equity to build a new life with her. Hearing it clearly made his plan impossible to misunderstand. Brielle had not only been promised a relationship, she had been promised a future that depended on my credibility, staying attached until Caleb no longer needed it. She asked how much money he had invested. I told her I did not know enough to answer honestly. Vanessa was still sorting Caleb's funds, our joint money, and obligations belonging to the development entity. Then Brielle asked what Caleb had never answered clearly. What did he actually bring to the project if my name, my firm, and my professional support disappeared? I told her she needed to ask him with the records. She sat quietly, then said she needed to know how much of the future he had sold her was real. I left without asking whether she planned to stay. I did not need Brielle to become my ally. I only needed Caleb to stop controlling which version of the truth each person received. Once the same facts reached all of us, his stories could no longer remain separate. They had started colliding with each other. This time, he could not fix that by changing the story again. I decided to separate from Caleb before mediation began. Vanessa told me not to enter looking for punishment, because divorce was not a place to prove who had been hurt more. We needed to identify what was mine, what was his, and what belonged to both of us. That sounded simple until every dollar in the project needed the right name. Caleb argued that joint money had gone into the project, and that my higher income gave me more control in our marriage. Vanessa did not deny the joint contributions that could be documented. She asked for records showing what Caleb had invested, what he had committed through the development entity, and what obligations I had agreed to share. I was not going to pretend every financial decision disappeared because he had betrayed me. The harder part was learning that the equity Caleb had promised was still uncertain. Financing had not closed. The engineering team had to be replaced, and the development group was rebuilding assumptions that depended on my involvement. He asked if I was satisfied watching everything he had built slow down. I told him I had never asked anyone to kill the project. I had only required it to survive without pretending I stood behind it. During mediation, Caleb made one final request. If I helped with the engineering transition once, he said the project could recover faster and our separation could end more cleanly. I realized he wanted the old pattern. Me stepping in after his choices created a problem and making the consequences easier. I told him no. A project that needed someone who never agreed to participate in order to survive had never been stable. By the end of the session, Vanessa and Caleb's attorney had the framework of a settlement. Caleb would keep what belonged to him. I would keep what belonged to me. And the marital assets and documented joint contributions would be divided properly. He would remain responsible for the investments and obligations he had chosen to create through the development project. I walked out without feeling victorious at all that day. I only felt relieved that, for once, everything in our marriage was finally being called by its real name. A few months later, I learned the project was still alive, but smaller than Caleb had imagined. The investment group required another engineering consultant, a revised budget, and assumptions that no longer depended on me. The project had to pay market rates for work Caleb once believed I would provide. I did not celebrate that. It simply had to prove it could stand without borrowing my credibility. Brielle left the development entity before the financing package was completed. I never saw their breakup, and I never asked Caleb what happened between them. A few weeks later, Brielle emailed me that she should have verified more before putting savings and career plans behind Caleb's promises. I saved the message with the records. I did not need her apology to move forward. My work continued. Martin asked me to lead a hospitality project with a client who had hired me and understood what my name meant. When I saw Rebecca Stanton printed beneath structural lead, I stopped for a second. Every line below it existed because I had chosen to be responsible for it. That felt different after everything Caleb had done. I used to think boundaries in a marriage meant two people did not trust each other enough. I know now that trust should never require you to stop reading documents, asking questions, or deciding what your own name stands for. I did not destroy Caleb's future, and I did not ask anyone else to destroy it. I only removed my name from a future he had never asked whether I wanted to build. If you have ever been made to feel selfish for setting a boundary, tell me what helped you say no. Loving someone and carrying their life for them can look identical until the day you stop. If this story meant something to you, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need to hear it. I learned that support is something you choose to give. It is not permission for someone else to spend your reputation as if it belongs to them.